Okay, so in this lecture, I'm going to talk about the first piece of coursework that you've got to do in this module, which will be a game website. So I'm going to introduce you to the coursework, explain the various deadlines and what you've got to submit in those deadlines. I'll explain how it's going to be assessed. And to kind of ease you into it, I'm going to give you a little bit of an example and how that example would be marked, suggest where you can get some ideas, and the last two sections will talk about what you see is what you get editors, such as Dreamweaver, and about frameworks and templates and the extent to which these will or will not help you complete your coursework. So this is a game website. It's worth 50% of the mark for the module, so it's recommended you give it a shot. It's an individual project. You're welcome to help each other out a little bit, share ideas and so on. But I'm expecting individual, something that is mainly your own work. And these are the three deadlines. So the first deadline is the project proposal, which you have to submit at the end of week 3. All these deadlines will be on the 5 p.m. on Friday. And there'll be the front end of the website, end of week 6, and the final project submission, end of week 11. Now, the exact deadlines will vary from year to year, and they'll be given in the project description, which I'll show you at the end. So this is a game website. It's a website that enables the user to play a game. The user can play the game alone or against the computer. The computer can do random moves or whatever. So there's no extra marks for artificial intelligence. So if you want to create some kind of amazing deep learning neural network or something that can play, noughts and crosses or something, you're welcome to. I might be able to give you some marks for complexity, but really the aim of this is not artificial intelligence, okay? So I wouldn't waste your time on it. There are extra marks for more sophisticated games, though. Games that have more stuff in them, harder to play, and so on and so forth. Crucial functionality, it's not just about the game. The game is an important part of the website, but it's equally important that you create a registration function and login functionality on the website. And you have to have a rankings page that displays the top scores of the registered users. So your game must be implemented in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and PHP. And now all user data must be stored in JSON format using HTML local storage. So there will be lectures on JSON. There will be lectures on HTML local storage. So don't worry if you don't understand how any of that, what that means even. But in general, this game is just going to be running within the browser locally. So you're not going to be creating, there will be some PHP, so there will be a server involved, but none of the significant functionality be on the server. It's all going to be JavaScript, and all the data is going to be stored within the browser. That's what HTML local storage is. A bit like cookies, but a more advanced version of it, if you know what cookies are. So you must use the specified technology to implement the game. With all of these pieces of coursework, the technology, we're trying to teach you the technology, so it's important that you use the specified technology. I'm not going to give you any marks at all if you use Flash. It's ancient technology now anyway. If you store the user data in a database, if you store the user data in a file, no marks for that. Has to be JSON, JSON format, HTML local storage. And if you locally store user data in a database or file, okay? This is not a database project. This is a project about getting you up to speed with JavaScript, HTML, PHP, that stuff. So don't fake it, okay? When I mark projects, probably I'll have a skim through the project report, and then I'm going to look at your code. I always look at the code of projects I'm marking, and encourage the other teachers to do the same. So it's totally pointless to try and fake it, okay? Don't store data using PHP MySQL, because you did that in Foundation Year or something, and then claim that it's stored in HTML local storage. When you open up the code, it's going to be blindingly obvious where the data is stored, and we're going to check that. So it's better to come along to the lab sessions and say, hey, look, I'm having problems with HTML local storage. Can you show me where I'm going wrong? Then we'll help you do that. But kind of, paying someone else who does it in PHP, MySQL, or whatever, it's not going to get you any marks, okay? It's not going to help you. Now, 10 marks, 10% of the marks for this, and 10% of the marks for your module overall, because there's 10% of everything is code quality. So there's 10 marks. 10% of the marks for this course are available for code quality, and that amounts to 10 marks here. So you must comment all of the important functionality, lay your code out tidily, use sensible variable names. So there's two reasons for this, okay? One is that it'll help you develop your project, all right? It's easy to write a few lines of messy JavaScript. It's very hard to write 1,000 lines of messy JavaScript because the messier it is, the harder it is to scale up and organize. And organization is the key to code that's more than a few lines long. So from your point of view, if you give things sensible variable names, have lots of comments, then you will find it much, much, much easier to build more complex projects in JavaScript, Java, or whatever programming language you're working in. The second reason for laying your code out tidily, using sensible variable names, and adding lots of comments is that when you move into the commercial world, you're going to be working as part of a team. And when I was at Trinity Mirror, they had the concept that it wasn't your code that you worked on or contributed or whatever, that everybody owned all of the code. All of the code was everybody's code, right? So you were working on some piece of the communal code, if you like. And a lot of my work at Trinity Mirror wasn't to do with writing new exciting functionality. Instead, it was about fixing and adapting the functionality that was already there. So I had to take someone else's code, change it a bit, and then recommit it to the repository so it became part of the communal code base again. And that's going to be your job, most likely, when you start out in this field. So since the code that you're creating is going to be actually edited by other people, you need to make sure that it's written as clearly as possible so that other people can also look at your code, understand what's going on, and make the changes that they need to make. When you leave the company in 10 years, no doubt there'll be a few lines of your code kicking around. No doubt that some of my code from Trinity Mirror is still kicking around there. And someone has got to understand that and modify it at a later point in time. And they can only do that if you comment it, lay it out tidily, and use sensible variable names. So for the sake of the future generations and for the sake of yourselves, for heaven's sake, take code quality seriously. Don't worry about beautiful website. So don't get hypnotized by the idea that your website has to look amazing. There's some marks for making a website look good, but 90% of the marks for this project are for other things, okay? So if you produce a really rubbish website, you can still get a first for this project. Rubbish-looking website, not a rubbish functionality. So it's nice to have a beautiful website, but I'm not teaching website design in this course. This is a course about website functionality, as I kind of explained in the previous lecture. Designers are going to do all the beautiful layout stuff, and your job is more likely going to be implementing those designs in code and making the code actually work. So don't worry too much about a beautiful website. Don't worry about cross-browser compatibility. I told you about hacking the thing to make it work on ancient versions of Internet Explorer. I'm not asking you to do that in this course. We're working with HTML5, I think CSS3, something like that, and the latest version of JavaScript and the latest browsers. We're going to get good at writing websites that work on the latest technology at a later stage in your lives. If you have some compelling reason to do so, you can make that work on older browsers as well. So you only have to demonstrate your website on a single version of a single browser at a single size, preferably Chrome or Firefox. You'll find Chrome is probably the best browser out there, and it's much easier to develop on, less crufty than Firefox, which I find slightly annoying these days. Don't worry about deploying it on a remote server. I'm not expecting you to sign up for some kind of free web hosting and copying your website across to some free web host server so it's on a public URL. That might be useful for your CV at a later point in time, but there's no marks for demoing on a remote server. Demo on a local machine. A server running on your local machine is absolutely fine. And don't panic when it comes to your demo if there's some minor bugs. You're going to demo your project to us, and if there's a few minor bugs, well, we're going to look at your code anyway, and if it's like some kind of minor error in your code, we'll be pretty forgiving about that. As a general rule on this course, always submit everything that you've done. So supposing you're working on the registration functionality and you didn't quite get it working, well, don't just delete it and submit the website without it, because we can always give you some marks for partial implementation of functionality, even if it's got some minor errors in it. Whereas we can't give you any marks if you don't submit a code that shows you've tried, right? So we've got lots of support for this project. So in one of the lab sessions early in the term, we got peer feedback and project proposals. So you're going to come up with some ideas, discuss them with your other students, and give yourself some feedback, as well as feedback from the lab teacher. You're going to have laboratory sessions on HTML, CSS, JavaScript, JSON local storage, and PHP. We're going to have some lab sessions dedicated to coursework. So when you get to the second half of the term, there'll be lab sessions where you can work on your coursework, and we'll give you some support on that. We've got the Q&A sessions if you've got any questions about the lectures, things you don't understand, demos you want to run through again. But there are only 22 hours of labs this term, okay? So you're going to have to work on this in your own time. 22 hours is not enough time to learn HTML, CSS, PHP, and JavaScript and produce a working game website, okay? It's not enough. You'll be very unlikely to pass this course if you just turn up to the labs and hope to do everything then. You have to spend some of your own time on this, and then you'll pass easily and you'll start enjoying it, okay? Guaranteed. Right, so what you have to submit. So there's three sort of components to the submission. First, you're going to write a project proposal. It's going to be worth 10% of the mark. It's going to be a short description of the project with some wireframes showing how your website's going to be laid out. And the deadline for that is the end of week 3. Then at the end of week 6, you're going to submit the front end of the website. So it's going to be 32.5% of the mark, and it's going to be all the code for the front end, all the HTML, CSS, and PHP, and some screenshots of the website. And then finally, at the end of term, you're going to submit all of the code, the complete functioning website. So submission methods, all online. So on the course website, you'll see Coursework 1 Awesome Term. There'll be here the description of the coursework. And then we got three links to submit the proposal, the front end, and the final submission. If for some reason UniHub's down, something like that, or if you're past the deadline, then contact your module. Just send your work into the module leader by email. Okay. So if you're doing CSD 2550, then I'm your module leader. So email it to me. You've got my email address from one of the lecture slides. Or if it's in a different module, then submit it to your module leader. If you're on a remote campus, again, you'll know who your module leader is. But make sure you get the work to your module leader if this isn't working or if you're late. I'm going to talk about late submissions a little bit. So the proper project proposal is a short document that briefly describes the proposed game and includes wireframe sketches of the website or screenshots of early prototypes. I kind of prefer wireframes, but if you prefer to work straight from the code, then that's okay. I can live with that. So the point of the project proposal is so that we can give you feedback about your idea and help you do it in the time available. So if you're struggling with programming, right, and you've come up with a really super complex game, then maybe we'll say to you, well, how can you build a simpler version of this game and then extend it later if you've got time? We're trying to prevent people taking on projects that are too complex for them, okay? And the other risk that I'm going to mention more later is that you might say, well, what I'm going to do is build Snake. It's a good solid game, Snake. And then we might say, well, Snake's a wonderful game, not criticizing Snake, but there's an enormous number of versions of Snake out there. Just be careful that you implement Snake from scratch, not just copy it off a tutorial, because if you copy it off a tutorial, you're going to get no marks. So we'll give you this kind of feedback. We'll make sure that you've got the project that's right for you. It's a fun project, whatever, and we'll help you to make that project happen. Don't mind in the least if you copy and paste stuff from the project proposal and the final project report. That's absolutely fine. Next stage, end of week 6, is the week website with navigation. So this is the front end of the website. All of the pages and navigation working. Okay? So parts of the page should be output using PHP functions. Okay, so you're going to learn a little bit of PHP this turn. Not much. Your main challenge will be getting the server running and output it, and then just getting a few scripts. And once you've got the idea, then we're going to use a few PHP functions to output navigation and footer, for example. If you just do very simple stuff like that, you can get full marks for the PHP. But if you dump HTML into the page with include, you're not going to get any marks, okay? A lot of people did that last year, and that's really a bit ridiculous. You write like an HTML page, I think with a PHP extension, and then you just include that, and it just dumps it in. No, PHP functions. They have to be PHP functions. And then we have, at this stage, not expecting the JavaScript functionality for the game, top scores, and user accounts. Instead, you're just maybe going to have the rankings page, can have like a fake table, or it can just be blank. That's absolutely fine. As long as the navigation's working, and you've got your logo or whatever, and the website's layout is all done, that's what you're going to be marked on at this stage. So at this stage, you're going to mark it for attractiveness, usability, and HTML, CSS, and PHP code quality. And after this submission, there's going to be no marks for usability or attractiveness. No more marks after this submission, okay? So all of the work on the front end has to be completed by the end of week 6. You're not going to get any more marks after week 6 for attractiveness or usability or any stuff like that. The rest of the marks will be for the JavaScript functionality, which will be the end of week 11. So to submit this, you just zip up all the code, send it to us. As I said, we always look at the code. and include a document with screenshots of all the pages of the website. So we want to see all of the pages of the website to help us mark it, really, so you don't have to run the PHP for 100 projects. The deadline for that's end of week 6. So the final submission will be all of the JavaScript functionality for your website, the game, the user registration login, the rankings table, and so on. Zip up the code, and I'd like a project report that describes the website and any issues you had with the development. So this is your chance to say, well, we tried that, but it didn't quite work, but I've included the code anyway, all this kind of stuff. So we want to know. You can then sort of justify us giving you half marks for some functionality that partly implemented, for example. And also, it's good to have a little bit of self-reflection. The deadline for that's the final deadline. You can submit this early, as I'm going to explain, but the final deadline is the end of week 11. So the final report, this should also be there. It should be a Word or PDF document. So it's a brief description of the project, screenshots of the website pages, and I also want a list of the third-party libraries that you used in the project, or a statement that no third-party libraries were used. Okay, this is so we can see, we'll know by looking at the code what third-party libraries you used, but it also makes it easier for us, and it's more honest of you, right, if you tell us, which third-party libraries. In general, as I'm going to explain, I don't mind you using third-party libraries at all, but we'd like to know which ones you used. Please do not include in any of the reports screenshots of code, screenshots of the command line, screenshots of Dreamweaver, or screenshots of NetBeans, all right? Don't want it in the report, please. The report should be describing this stuff, okay? Don't put we've got the code. We don't need to see a screenshot of the code in NetBeans, all right? So, in general, I'm not expecting everyone to attempt Coursework 3. You should attempt Coursework 3 if you want to get a good mark for this course, okay? If you just want to pass, you don't necessarily have to even attempt it, or you could just write the proposal and not bother with the actual code. But if you want to get a good mark, if you want to get it first, you've almost certainly got to attempt Coursework 3, and you can start on it when you've submitted Coursework 1. So if you want to get a good mark for the module, you should work on Coursework 1 ahead of schedule, right? Submit it as soon as you can, and then start work on Coursework 3. So if I was on this course, I'd probably try and crack on with Coursework 1 by maybe week 8, week 9, submit it, write the proposal for Coursework 3, get some feedback on that, and then start some serious work on Coursework 3 over Christmas. And that's the great advantage of the recorded lectures, right? You can watch the lectures that you need to study Coursework 3 long before they would have been scheduled in an ordinary course. So to assess your projects, we're going to read the project reports, obviously. We're going to read the code. We'll run some of the code, not necessarily all of it. And we'll view a short demonstration of your website during laboratory sessions after the submission dates. I'm going to run through this in a little bit of detail. We'll mark the project out of 100, and then we'll scale down that mark to a mark between 0 and 50 that corresponds to 50% of the overall mark for the module. Now, the project will be marked using the assessment criteria. So I strongly recommend that you look at these assessment criteria. I'm going to run through them now in detail. These assessment criteria are also included in the project description. And to understand what you have to do, the best place to start is to start with these assessment criteria. So if you want a good mark, I strongly recommend you read them. And I strongly recommend that you use these criteria to mark your project yourself before you submit it. And then that'll give you an idea of what you need to do to get a better mark. It's not hard to mark your project using these criteria by yourselves. We're also very happy to give you feedback before you submit your project. So if you want us to have a quick look through your project, give you a rough idea about the mark you're likely to get, not guarantee, of course, then send it in to us or talk to us in the labs, and we can tell you, well, if you spend a bit more time on code quality, you get a better mark, or you're missing the PHP, maybe you should look at that. It's not hard to do, and all these kind of things, we can help you get a better mark. We're here to help. We want to give people good marks, but we can't do that if you don't show. We can't help you get a better mark if you don't show us your projects. So assessment criteria are all inside the description of Coursework 1, which I'll run through just at the end. So these are the assessment criteria. So this is how I teach my modules. I have very clearly specified how many marks are available for each different piece of functionality. And I've tried to explain as clearly as I can when these, what you need to do to get these marks. So now I'm going to run through each of these assessment criteria to explain how it works. So this is the project proposal. So a short description of the website, including wireframes of design, screenshots of the prototype. Don't include the code, the command line, Dreamweaver, etc. So these are the deadlines when I'm recording the lecture, but obviously these deadlines are going to change year by year. So I've just put week 3. It's the end of week 3. That's when this has to be submitted by. So you get 5 marks for the description and the design, and 5 marks for the website, wireframes or screenshots. Okay. Then we got, this is the second deadline, right? The end of week 6. This is all of the front end with the navigation, the PHP and so on. So if you build this is like the front end essentially, implemented HTML, CSS stuff. With maybe placeholders, just an empty page saying rankings or whatever. You don't have to implement the JavaScript at this stage. So you get 5 marks for multiple pages in a navigation bar. So if you produce, or navigation system of some kind. So if you produce a navigable website with multiple pages, you'll get 5 marks even if it looks totally rubbish. Okay? Then you get an extra 10 marks for attractiveness and usability. So if your websites are beautiful, then you can get extra marks here. But also usability is important. So I saw quite a few projects last year where you click on a link and it takes you through to a page that doesn't have a navigation bar on it. So it's impossible to navigate. So it's difficult to navigate back to the original page. Okay? So that's a usability issue, right? If it's hard to move around your website from different pages, then you're going to lose marks for usability. So attractiveness and usability marked together, a total of 10 marks. So 5 marks for some kind of basic website, 10 marks for an extra 10 marks for attractive, usable website. And to get the 10 marks, to get 10 out of 10 for this, your website should be at the same level as a commercial website. Okay, if it looks as slick and well put together as a commercial website, you can get your 10 marks there. Okay, that's the rough guide. Then we've got PHP. So your PHP functions should be used to generate parts of the website dynamically. Now you must use PHP functions, and that'll be clearer after the PHP lecture. There's no marks are available for using include to add blocks of HTML to the page. I want you to use echo to push out the navigation bar and so on to get familiar with PHP functions. I'm not interested in people using include. So you've got 10 marks there for outputting part of the page dynamically using PHP. Again, that'll be clear when you've done the PHP, watch the PHP lecture. And then there's 7.5 marks for code quality, the HTML code quality, CSS code quality, and PHP code quality. So don't lose these marks by handing in some scruffy code. You might as well get those marks. It'll help you pass. It'll help you get it first. So this is my example of good HTML code quality. Okay, the page is nicely laid out with appropriate indentations. And then I've got comments for the key parts of the page. Okay, I've got like the navigation section there, got the registration section there. So that's nice, clean HTML. This is not clean HTML. It doesn't have a single comment. Yay, I'm the source editor, whatever. So it's basically a complete mess because it's been generated by what you see is what you get editor, as I'll explain later. So if your code looks like that, 0 marks for code quality. Code looks like that, 2.5 marks for HTML code quality. Now we've got the game. So the game must be implemented in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There's no marks for Flash. 0, and most important thing here is that 0 marks will be awarded for a game that's copied from the internet. So last year, I was a little bit more generous. I gave people, there were like 30 marks for the game, and I give people like 10 or something for a game that was copied off the internet. This year, no such generosity will take place. If you copy a game, you'll get 0 marks for it. So it's a complete waste of those few seconds that it's going to take to go copy and paste into your website, right? You just get no marks for it. So here we're giving 5 marks for the website having a basic game that the user can play and obtain a score. We can give you some marks for a partially functioning game, but really this can be very, very simple. You get the 5 marks for any old game, not fussy. Then there's an additional 10 marks for games that have complex JavaScript, sophisticated JavaScript, or a substantial amount of JavaScript. So this is a little bit subjective, but to give you a rough idea, I had one submission last year that had like 1,000 lines of code roughly, and it was like a game of Tetris, and that got full marks for complexity. Or a sort of fully functioning Space Invaders that's like 600 lines of code, or might get 15 marks maybe. So it's that kind of level. So, or if you may be using your objects-oriented JavaScript in an intelligent way to produce your game, then again, you can get good marks for that. So if you're producing a complex, impressive game, you'll get some marks for complexity. If it's a very simple quiz game, you'll get 0 marks for complexity. Now, next piece of functionality is the user accounts. So I'm expecting you to be able to create user accounts. So you should be able to register on the site, enter your details, and then there'll also be another page where you can log in. You enter your username, password, whatever. It'll log you into the site. And when you're logged into the site, you play the game. It'll keep track of your high score, and it'll update your high score on the rankings table. That's the idea behind all this. So you must store the user data for all of this functionality in JSON format using HTML local storage. There'll be no marks given for storage in files, no marks for server-side storage with PHP, MySQL, MongoDB, and so on. You have to use HTML local storage. It has to be in JSON format. And I'll explain all this in the subsequent lectures, so stick to it and get the marks. So you get 5 marks for storing basic data in JSON format. So if you store the name, email address, and a password or something, you get those 5 marks. If you store additional data from the user, so address, phone number, and so on, then you can get another 5 marks. So validation of user data means checking for blank fields. Maybe the user doesn't type anything and they just click submit. Maybe they type in something that's not a valid email address, so there's 5 marks for that. And then there's 5 marks for login with appropriate error messages. So it's not really great if you enter your details, you click login and nothing happens because it's wrong password or something. It's better to give appropriate feedback to the user. And again, I'm going to explain that in subsequent lectures. Then we've got a rankings table. So suppose I log in, I register on the website, I log into the website, I play the game a few times and I get a top score of 5, and then I log out. And then someone else logs into the website, they play the game a few times and they get a top score of 100, let's say, and then they log out. So what I'm expecting here is a ranking table of user scores. So the user scores, the user's top scores are stored in HTML local storage, and then the website will display the top scores of all the users, ideally ordered inappropriately. Again, no marks for server-side storage with PHP, MySQL, MongoDB, etc. And so if you can successfully store the user scores in JSON format using HTML local storage, you get 5 marks. And then there's 5 marks for a rankings page listing the top scores of all the users. And then we've got 2.5 marks for JavaScript code quality. So again, an example of JavaScript code quality. So this function should have a comment on it. But apart from that, this is roughly the sort of thing I'd expect. So each function should have a comment. And then each of the key bits of functionality should have a nice comment to explain what it is. Should be nicely laid out like that. That's 2.5 marks for JavaScript code quality. If it's a messy kludge without any comments, you're not going to get any marks for code quality. And then finally, we've got the project report. This should briefly describe the project. You're welcome to reuse material from the earlier reports you had to submit, but don't include screenshots of code, command line, Dreamweaver, NetMeans, and so on. So you get 4 marks for documenting all of the website's pages, and then 4 marks for clearly describing the project, explaining how the game works, how the registration, login, error handling, error input validation, and rankings functionality works, and 2 marks for listing the third-party libraries or stating that no third-party libraries are used in the project. So that's the assessment criteria, and to give you a better idea about how this works, I'm going to run through a very simple example game, I think in the next section, or in a later section. Now, so you're going to submit all that stuff to us, but you have to demonstrate your project to us in the labs after the submission date. So this will be early in the spring term, you'll be demonstrating your project. So we're going to ask you questions about your project. You're going to say, well, what does this do? What does this do? Blah, 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 and check that it's your own work. So this has several purposes, okay? One purpose is to make sure that it's your work, okay? So we're going to say, well, what's this bit of code and what's this doing? And, can you please explain it to us? And if you can't explain it, we're going to suspect that you paid someone to write it for you or that you copied it off the internet. So you must be able to explain all of the code that you're demonstrating. So the second reason for this is it enables us to see your game working, right? Maybe you've just got it running in one version of your browser. Maybe I'm looking at you trying to mark the code using a different browser. It's a way of you showing the functionality of your game to best advantage, and your functionality of the website to your best advantage. So, if you're practicing your demo, you'll run it through a few times, make sure that horrible code error you get when you enter the wrong kind of email address doesn't occur, right? So you can fix it a little bit so that the demo looks beautiful, right? And third purpose of this demonstration is so we can give you some feedback about your project. This is your chance to show us the work you've done and for us to tell you what's good and bad about it. So maybe you can improve for the future and feel good about yourself for the good things you've done in your project. You must demonstrate the submitted code, not an improved version. Okay, as I said, we're going to look at your code. So you're going to submit your code before Christmas. You're going to mark it over Christmas. You're going to demonstrate it to us in spring. And we're going to, if you show us some amazing functionality that's not present in submitted code, you're not going to get any marks for it, okay? So just demonstrate the submitted code. It's not worth trying to improve it or whatever, because we will detect that because we'll have looked at the original code. You must demonstrate it. This is a mandatory part of the marking of the project. So your final submission will receive 0 marks if you've not demonstrated by the end of week 15. You must demonstrate it to us in the labs, or you will not get a mark for it and you'll get 0. So this is, I'm going to mention this in every lecture on coursework because it's important. So in general, we're very unlikely to give extensions to coursework. Very unlikely to accept excuses, and the worst excuse is I lost my USB stick, or I forgot, or I got up late, or I started it 24 hours before the deadline, can I please have an extension? The answer will be no, okay? So I strongly recommend you hand coursework in on time. Don't deal with excuses. I'm not interested. Contact your module leader before the deadline if you run into problems. So as I'm going to explain, there's a whole mechanism in this university for handling people who have personal problems, illness, and so on and so forth. So the best thing to do is first is talk to your module leader if you run into any of that stuff. So that's me if it's CSD 2550. So unless your module leader has given you permission for late submission, the marks available for coursework will halve every 24 hours after the deadline and will be 0 after 1 week. Because I've got a big heart, I'm giving you this little bit of slack. So, if it's a little bit late, you won't lose any marks. And if it's a bit later than that, you lose half the marks and so on and so forth. This will be stuck to rigidly, okay? If you hand it in late, more than 24 hours after the deadline, you're going to lose half the marks or more. We're not being harsh, and I'll explain the reason here, okay? So the reason is that I don't accept excuses is because I'm not qualified to assess the excuses, essentially. Whereas the university has this deferral of assessment mechanism. So if you have personal problems that interfere with your studies, you can apply for a deferral of assessment. Now, a lot of students maybe have issues with illness, for example, or have family members with issues of illness, and they have to go in and help them in hospital or whatever. All that kind of stuff, completely understand. And in that case, you can apply for a deferral of assessment. This gives you extra time to complete coursework, or you can retake the exam without a mark penalty. So what that typically means is if you've got a deadline, say if you've got problems with coursework 1, I can give you another 12 weeks or something to complete it, and there'll be no mark penalty associated with that if you're granted a deferral of assessment. So the key thing about deferral of assessment is that you have to provide documentary evidence. Okay, and that's why coming to me with your problems, I can point you in this direction, but I can't assess the documentary evidence myself, and I can't grant deferrals of assessment myself. You have to go through the appropriate channels. So there's some information there. You can go to UniHelp or whatever in the library. That's the best place to start. Once you've got a deferral of assessment, it appears on your record. I can see you've got it, and I can make it adjust the deadlines without a mark penalty. But this is the right way to do it. If you just submit late, or you say, oh, sir, I've been feeling a bit ill this week, I can't give you an extension. If you go through the appropriate channels, you can get an extension and no problem at all. We're there to help, right? We're not trying to make things hard for you, but you have to prove it, okay? Because otherwise everyone can just say, oh, well, my auntie's feeling a bit off this week, and therefore can I please have an extension? No, you have to provide documentary evidence, and that's how it works. So plagiarism, I'm sure you've been lectured about this ad nauseum, but to make it clear I want to make it clear how it stands on this course. Plagiarism is a serious academic offense. Plagiarism is where you just copy someone's work and submit it as your own work, or copy something off the internet and submit it as your own work and try and get credit for it. So students that submit identical projects will be reported to the university. End of story. If you just copy someone else's project and say, this is my work, you're both going to get reported to the university, because I'm not going to make detailed investigations about this. If you're found guilty, you have to resubmit your work. Your mark could be capped. You could be kicked out. All kinds of stuff could happen. So don't do it, okay? And copying stuff off another student is just as bad as copying stuff off the internet in my book. More information there. However, that said, there's often a blurry line between copying and collaboration. So say you're in the labs, working with your mates. You've got separate projects. So in a good way, collaboration's great, right? You're working in the labs with your mates. You've got separate websites. One's doing Snake, let's say. One's doing Breakout. And you're hitting problems and you're sort of collaborating to try and solve them, but what you're submitting at the end is essentially your own work. That's absolutely fine. I strongly encourage that kind of collaboration. But what's not acceptable is for two students working in the labs to work on the same project with minor variations and then submit that project they've worked on together as their own work. So suppose you build a quiz website and one calls it, My Super Quiz, and the other one calls it My Ultra Quiz, and then they change a few of the questions in the two quizzes, but the code looks identical, then that's not acceptable. Okay? And I've seen that in other modules, and I've penalized it in other modules. So it's not acceptable for students to collaborate on a project which they submit on individual work. This is essentially a group project which people are submitting as individual work. That's not okay. So if we come across near identical projects, and we'll identify these by looking at the code, we're going to divide the mark between the projects. So suppose a project gets a mark of 60% and near identical versions are handed in by 3 people. This scenario has occurred, which is why it's all being mentioned here. So each person is going to get 20% instead of 60%, because essentially you've kind of produced you've sort of produced a group project and then you've divided up the work between you. So I'm going to divide the mark up between you. It only applies to the marks of the parts of the project that are identical. So please don't do this. Just work on your own projects, help each other out, but don't work on a single project and pretend that it's 3 different projects. Okay. Right. So to make all this clear, I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to show you this very simple game that asks the user to add 2 numbers. It's got the registration login functionality. It displays the top scores of the users. So I'll show you this little example. I'll show you how many marks this example will get, and that'll give you an idea about how I'm going to mark these projects. So let's start with a demo, which will probably, it's not perfect code, so it's going to, break in some ways probably. But here we go. Here's the website. So here you have the game, which is this quiz thing. Then we've got the login, where once I'm registered, I can log in. And then you've got the registration page, rankings, and the admin. Okay, so this just allows me to clear the browser storage without messing about too much. So let's start with the registration page. So let's start with, let's call myself David, password 12. So we're going to register. Feedback, David registered successfully. So now we're going to log in. David. That's what I mean about doing demos carefully. I should have practiced a little bit more. It tells me that I'm logged in and I can log in out there. Now if I go back to that page, I'm still logged in. Okay, that's important. So now rankings, I haven't played the game. Oh yes, so my ranking now, because I've registered, is 0 because I've never played the game, haven't got a score. So now we're going to go play the game. So 5 plus 10, 15. Pretty good at the maths, right? 1 plus 3, 4. 8 plus 1, 9. 2 plus 6, 8, right? So pretty good. Got 4 out of 4. Rankings, my top score there is David. So now if I go back to the login page, I can log out and register as, I don't know, Karen, let's say. And 1, 2. So now Karen's registered. Now I can logged in as null. I'm not quite sure what's happening there. I told you it was, not perfect code. It's only a quick demo knocked up. So logged in as Karen now, okay? So rankings, David 4, Karen 0. Now play the game. Let's say Karen's not, quite as amazing as David at maths. So 17, 75, what's that, 12, was that? Right, 3 out of 4, right? So now we've got the rankings page, David and Karen. So, first thing you can see, it looks lousy, right? So you wouldn't give me no marks for attractiveness, as I explained. But we've got nice navigation. It's very easy. It's got high usability, this website. And we've got the rankings page here, which we've gone through now. And then we've got the registration page. The registration, login functionality is all working. And we've got a really lousy game that's simple quiz. Okay? So now I've explained this, given you a little demo of this website. I'll now show you how this website will be marked. And I think that might help you to understand what I'm expecting in this project. So here's the assessment criteria. So you're going to submit something like this maths game, hopefully a lot better. We saw some pretty cool games last year. And then we're going to use this assessment criteria to mark your project. So let's suppose you submit a project proposal. Let's suppose it's okay. And, blah, blah, we gave it 7 marks. These are just off the top of my head kind of marks. These don't matter so much. Now, next, end of week 6, you're going to submit the website with the navigation bar and so on and so forth, the PHP. Now, in this case, the version I just demoed is all HTML, CSS, so there's no PHP. So let's suppose the website, so we've got multiple pages and navigation bars. So I told you get the 5 marks for that, regardless of how lousy it looks. And then I gave myself 2 marks for usability. It's not attractive, no marks for attractiveness, but a couple of marks because it's easy to use. So I give it 7 marks for the website. Now this version of the website is not PHP. I could easily have implemented a version with PHP if I wanted more marks, but in this case, this is just the HTML version. And then let's suppose I did OK with my code quality. I mean, it's actually beautiful code, but you know, for the sake of the example, let's suppose it's got a few, missing quite a lot of comments or something like that. Right, so now we've got the game. So I did not copy this game off the internet, so I'm not getting 0 marks. So I have a basic game that the user can play and obtain a score. You saw I obtained a score, how many questions I answered correctly. It's fully functional, so I get the full 5 marks. But it's a very simple game, all right? It's just a simple quiz, you know, nothing complex about that at all. So it's getting 0 marks for complexity. So it's getting 5 out of 15 for the functionality of the game implemented in JavaScript. And then we've got the user accounts. So it did store basic data, so I think that's 5. Doesn't store any additional data, so that's didn't get any marks there. And let's say the validation and login was okay. So that'd be 15. So I knocked a couple of marks off because maybe the validation could have been better, something like that. And also there's a couple of bugs, as you saw. So let's say roughly 13 for the user accounts. The rankings table, it's superb, right? You know, that's working fine. The logged in users scores updated nicely, and it shows all the scores of the logged in users. So that gets 10 marks. And then the JavaScript code quality, let's suppose that's pretty good, I think. So let's give it 2. Finally, let's suppose I wrote a project report that described everything, listed third-party libraries, and so on and so forth. So for this very basic website, you can get 57. Now, that's a 2, which is a 2-2, okay? Now, so first thing I want to say is don't underestimate how difficult this is if you've never written a line of JavaScript in your life, or even if you've never written a line of CSS. You know, it's not a complex website, but there's a few things there, okay? You know, I had to get the game working with the dynamic changing of the scores and all that kind of stuff. I've had to store all my stuff in JSON format in HTML local storage. You know, getting the rankings table working, with, pulling out stuff from local storage. You know, there's a fair bit of stuff I've had to do to get all this working. So even though it looks kind of rubbish, and it is kind of rubbish, it's not totally rubbish, right? There's been a fair amount of work gone into this. So 2-2 is probably about right. Another thing to bear in mind is this is a dynamic website, okay? So to get your 2-2 for this particular project, I had to write, on a typical page, I had to write that much HTML and this much JavaScript. And this is the hard bit, okay, the JavaScript, not the HTML. I think you'll find the HTML pretty easy and the JavaScript much more tricky. That's certainly the case of previous years. So don't focus on the HTML and CSS. As we looked at the criteria, you know, there's a maximum of 15 marks for producing amazing HTML and CSS. And if you just do that, you're going to fail this particular piece of coursework, okay? You've got to focus both on the JavaScript. You've got 5 weeks to focus on the JavaScript as well as the HTML and CSS. Now, obviously, if we wanted to get better mark for this website, we could produce better visuals. We could have got another 8 marks for making it look more attractive. That would have pushed us up in the 2-1 territory. If I just learned the basics of PHP, I could have got another 10 marks on top. If I'd used PHP functions to output part of the website. Obviously, I could have got written a more sophisticated game. That would have taken more effort. I'd had to put, to get those extra 10 marks, I'd probably have had to write a much more complex game. But that's just writing the game is the fun bit, really. And if I'd fixed a few of the bugs of the user registration and taken more data from the user, then I could have got more marks there. So there are many ways in which I could have pushed this up to a 2-1 or a first without doing a great deal more effort. And these will be some of the ways. OK, so I hope that explains what I'm expecting you to do for this piece of coursework. And in the Q&A sessions, you'll have plenty of opportunities to ask about clarification, and I'll run through some of the stuff and the assessment criteria and stuff then as well. Right, so in this section I want to talk about some ideas for your game, okay? So if you're thinking about what you're going to do for your game, first place to start is look at some JavaScript games on the internet, okay? So you've got like card games, you've got simple graphical games, you've got quizzes. There's some nice examples there. So, Breakout's a classic, right? You're kind of bouncing the ball. I'll show you how to use the canvas in JavaScript, that lets you do this kind of game very easily. Got racing games, you're super cool, right? You can do some kind of scrolling. Had a racing game last year where someone had like a scrolling road and sort of drove along it around obstacles and stuff. Space invaders of various kinds, shooting asteroids, shooting comets and blowing up other spaceships and so on and so forth. Card games are pretty good. They're complex to do, but you can get those 10 marks for complexity by doing a nice card game, maybe in an object-oriented way. You can think of a simple one like Snap, or a more complicated one like Poker, or even more complicated like Bridge or Solitaire or something. Numbers games like Sudoku, again, easy to do with the JavaScript canvas. You could even think about geolocation games. So HTML5's got support for geolocation that's covered in the Headfirst JavaScript, Headfirst HTML5 programming book. So you should be able to get the user's position by running JavaScript in a phone or tablet. Check it works. If it works, maybe you could do a quest game that involves going to real physical locations, complete challenges. It might also work on your laptop. So obviously check that geolocation works before you base your whole game idea on it. Now, it's absolutely fine to get ideas from websites and adapt them for your own game. I'm all for that. That's why I'm mentioning it all here, okay? What's not fine is to copy a game directly from the internet and submit it as your own work. For me, that counts as plagiarism, and you're going to get 0 marks for a copied game in this course, all right? So don't imagine that you can save yourself lots of trouble by just copying Breakout or by following a tutorial and then copying all the code from that tutorial, okay? Lots of people, 30% maybe of the students in the first year did this, and those 30% lost a lot of marks by copying games, okay? And this year there'll be no marks to gain from it whatsoever. Now you might think, aha, I'm going to be super cunning and copy this game off the internet. Aha, I'm going to get lots of marks for this game, kind of thing. If you're the kind of person who goes, aha, a lot, that is. But it's extremely obvious when someone's copied a game from the internet. So I saw lots of examples of this. Last year, the game had 500 lines of tidy, object-oriented, comment-free code. That was the game part of the website. But the student who did the coursework couldn't integrate the score functionality, couldn't provide the rankings page for the game, and the login functionality probably didn't exist either. So it was like it was a website that was almost JavaScript free, apart from the apart from the game code. So in that case, it's obvious, right? Someone who can't write the login and rankings functionality is not going to be capable of writing 500 lines of complex game code, okay? It's no way. So the first thing I'll do when I see a project like that is do a careful search for similar games to the one that's been submitted, and 95% of the time I found the matching game, and then provided a link in the marking criteria and gave that. And this year there'll be no marks for that. So I will use extensive searches to check your coursework extremely carefully. It will be obvious that your game's copied, and we will find the copied game, and we will give you 0 marks for a copied game. So in my opinion, you're much better off writing a simple game, such as a quiz from scratch, like 5 marks, instead of copying a game from the internet, which will give you 0 marks. I'll show you how you can write a simple quiz game, and if you use my code to write a simple quiz game, you can get those 5 marks. If you copy a game off the internet, you'll get 0 marks. So don't do it, please. So if you want more information about this coursework, there's a document describing Coursework 1 on the course website. It has a detailed breakdown of the deadlines and assessment criteria, and feel free to ask questions in the Q&A and laboratory sessions. So I can just show you that document there before I go into the final section of the talk. So if you follow that link on the course website, you'll get this document here. So I strongly recommend that you read this website. This explains the key points, which I've run through, explains the different deadlines, penalties for plagiarism, how we're going to assess it. But the most important part of all is here you've got the assessment criteria telling you each of the pieces of functionality and how many marks are available for that. So if you want to get a good mark for your project, work your way through the assessment criteria, implement all the different bits of functionality that's specified there, and make sure you've got them all there. There'll be no surprises for you when you submit your project, because you should already have looked at that assessment criteria and marked it a little bit yourself, okay? Right. Now what have I done? Okay. Right, so in the last part of this talk, the last 2 parts of this talk, I'm going to say a little bit about what you see is what you get editors and frameworks and templates. So this rather annoying acronym, what you see is what you get. It stands for the kinds of tools, such as these ones, that will let you create a website without knowing any HTML or CSS. So they work a bit like a word processor, that you have a sort of graphical front end, and you play around, you put in images, you type in the text, and you apply formatting to the text. And behind the scenes, Dreamweaver or one of these other tools will create the HTML and CSS for you. And so it'll dynamically generate the HTML depending on what you're doing in the browser. This is a typical example. I think it's Dreamweaver, classic tool for many years, possibly a little dated now. And so if I want to create a Jasper Joel photography site, I'll paste a picture of Jasper in there and I'll create links or whatever. And it'll all be done in this kind of graphical environment. And then I can save that as an HTML file or export it as a website or whatever. And all the HTML will be created behind the scenes. So this is what's meant by what you see is what you get editor. And a lot of people, when they're on a website course, think, hey, I just get hold of Dreamweaver, and then all my problems will be solved because I can just create a beautiful website like that and get lots and lots of marks for it. So many websites have static content that changes rarely. So, if you're creating a band website, or in this case, I'm not sure who Jasper or a photography website in this case, that's probably going to be mostly static content, right? How often does the band have a new tour? Maybe once or twice a year. So it's very easy in that case to just change the website and upload a new version of it. But other websites are very dynamic, like Gmail, Facebook. Your game website is going to be very dynamic as well. So these kind of what you see is what you get editors are kind of fine for producing static websites, right? If you're just producing a piece of content that just sort of sits there and people download it from the web, then that's okay. But it's a much less useful approach if you want to produce a dynamic website that has lots of JavaScript. And your coursework is all going to be dynamic. It's all going to have lots of JavaScript or lots of PHP, stuff that's going to generate the HTML dynamically. It's not going to be just a static piece of HTML that exists for all time. So what you see is what you get editors typically produce messy code that's not commented and difficult to understand, okay? But if you want to dynamically change that code, if you want to produce a game website where you've got a rankings table whose content is determined by what the user's done in the JavaScript game, then you're going to have to understand the code that the editor's generated, and you're going to somehow have to stop that editor from changing your changes when you change some other piece. So when you're editing your website in the Dreamweaver, let's say, you might overwrite the changes that you needed to have in there to make the JavaScript work, for example. So you're going to have to understand the code, and you're going to have to stop your Dreamweaver or whatever it is from erasing the changes that you've made to the code. So this is kind of what you see is what you get editors typically generate, right? So here on the left, we've got the all this nice formatting and all this kind of things we can do in the visual graphical environment, and then that's generating this messy, nasty stuff here. So if you're writing your website, maybe you could use this to generate that, but then you've got to understand that anyway, because your JavaScript's going to have to dynamically insert, David's logged in, or the rankings table, or some of the game functionality as well, probably. So you're not gaining a lot by using this to generate that, because you've still got to understand that at the end of the day. So in my maths game with rankings, we've got the nice bit of HTML here, but we've got a ton of JavaScript here, and we've got to understand both of these things if we want to make the whole website work. Furthermore, if you produce something that looks like that, you're going to get rubbish marks for code quality, right? This is a 0 marks for code quality. You produce something like that, then that's like 10 marks for code quality. So not only are you going to find it harder to develop your website, you're also going to lose at least 10 marks for your website because it's going to have lousy code quality. So in my view, what you see is what you get editors will not save you time or provide an easy shortcut to completing the coursework. I don't mind you using them because they're not going to benefit you in any way, but they're going to make it harder for you to pass the course. And we're not going to be able to give you any support on them as well. They're just going to make everything more obscure, more difficult. You might produce an attractive front end, but that's only worth 10 of the marks out of 100. You might as well spend your time making your code look pretty. So that's what you see is what you get at editors. And now I want to say a little bit about frameworks and templates. So there's a lot of libraries and frameworks exist that make web development easier. So you've got Bootstrap, Angular, jQuery. I'm going to cover some of these in a future lecture. And you're more than welcome to use these in your projects. We can only give you limited support. We're not all experts on Angular, for example, which is, messes with your mind a little bit. So by all means, use them. A lot of people use Bootstrap and jQuery in the previous year run the course. And if you find these easier and they make your life easier and they help you, feel free to use them, okay? Not a problem. You're not going to lose any marks, and you might gain marks if it enables you to build a better website. On the other hand, there are a lot of templates that are also available for web development. So with the case of a template, what someone's done is they kind of produced a working wireframe. That's one way to think about it. So you have sort of blocks where you have all the different pieces of content, and then you kind of put your content into the different kinds of areas as specified by the template. So you kind of tweak the layout, you add your text and images, and then you produce this website. So this is the kind of things like templates. So some designer or other has produced these sort of amazing looking templates, and then you pick a template, typically spend a small amount of money on it, or there's probably free ones too, and then you change the navigation bar and you put your own bits in here and whatever. So again, I'm not going to penalize you for using a template if you want to use one to make your game or shopping websites more attractive. But these templates are very similar to what you see as what you get websites. So they have a lot of complex code in them. It's often written in PHP, and almost certainly it's going to make your project more difficult. Because in these templates, you're somehow going to have to produce a rankings page that inserts where the JavaScript's bunging in the content dynamically. And you're somehow going to have to adapt them so it has like this kind of page for your JavaScript. There isn't a template. Template probably doesn't exist for a game website, so you're going to have to heavily modify these. And to heavily modify these, you're going to have to understand them, and understanding these templates is going to be a lot harder than building a website from scratch. Okay? Much better to build a simple website from scratch and make it look pretty in the best way you can, rather than trying to hack one of these templates to do what you need it to do. So in my view, these templates are going to make your project more difficult. I know nothing about them, I don't care about them, and I can't help you if you run into problems. So in my view, you're going to get a lower mark if you use a template, rather than just building a simple website from scratch and adding the functionality as you need to, and adding CSS to make it look more attractive. So you're not going to lose marks in the terms of penalties. You'll lose marks because it's going to be much harder for you. So in general, frameworks and templates are used all the time in industry to save time, right? Website companies use templates a lot, right? But I think they're best used when you have a solid grasp of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and PHP. Once you understand these technologies well, then it's easy to use a template because you can look at the template code and you can change it to make it do what you need it to do. And the best way to understand HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and PHP is to build a couple of websites from the ground up so you get a solid grasp of the technologies. Once you've developed your understanding of these technologies, you'll then find it much easier to use the frameworks and templates. So get to grips with the basics, and then move from the basics up to the more advanced stuff. Then maybe frameworks and templates be the way ahead. But don't try and save yourself time. Don't try and avoid the hard work of learning these technologies by using templates, because you're just going to get in a mess. And I've seen people get in this kind of mess, and that's why I'm saying, please don't get in a mess yourselves, okay? So this lecture, we covered Coursework 1, game website. If you want to attempt Coursework 3, then you want to submit Coursework 1 as soon as possible. Don't rush it, but aim to submit it early so that you can do the proposal before Christmas and then start work on Coursework 3 over Christmas. That's my recommendation. And the next lecture is going to introduce you to Coursework 3, which is a single-page web application.